The sand doesn't lie. It covers, it hides, but eventually it reveals. It started as a search for one missing woman, Shannon Gilbert, a young escort from New Jersey who vanished after a mysterious 911 call. On May 1st, 2010, officers combed through the remote and windswept shores of Gilgo Beach on Long Island, New York. They weren't looking for a serial killer. They were looking for her. But what they found was something no one expected. While sweeping through the underbrush near Ocean Parkway, a police officer's cadaver dog signaled. Moments later, human remains were uncovered, badly decomposed, wrapped in burlap, discarded like trash among the dunes. At first, they thought it might be Shannon, but it wasn't. Then just days later, another body was found, then another, and another. Within weeks, 4 bodies, all young women, had been discovered in almost identical fashion. Same condition, same method of disposal, same chilling precision, and they were all lined up, within a quarter-mile stretch. The public was horrified. The police were now dealing with something far bigger than a missing person case. They had stumbled onto a graveyard someone had created deliberately, carefully, and over years. The crime scene expanded. More search teams, more dogs, more unearthed secrets. By the end of that winter, 10 sets of human remains had been found in the area surrounding Gilgo Beach. Some were complete skeletons. Some were only partial remains. Some belonged to adults. One set belonged to a toddler. There was no longer any doubt. Long Island had a serial killer, and he had been dumping bodies along that lonely stretch of beach for over a decade. What made it even more disturbing was the silence. No witnesses, no strange sightings, no patterns in the dates, just bodies and sand. The media soon dubbed the unknown suspect the Long Island serial killer, or simply LISK. But in 2010, no one knew who he was. No name, no face, no trail, just a feeling that someone was watching, waiting, and hunting. In the headlines, they were just names, but to someone, they were everything. The first 4 women found along Gilgo Beach became known as the Gilgo Four. Their names were Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, Amber Lynn Costello, and Maureen Brainerd Barnes. They weren't strangers to each other, but they shared striking similarities. All young, all petite, all worked as escorts through Craigslist or similar platforms, and all had gone missing between 2007 and 2010. Each one vanished without a trace, and for years no one knew where they'd gone. Their families had searched. Some had reported them missing. Others were told by police that these women had likely just left town, that maybe they didn't want to be found. It's a story too often repeated when a woman is poor, works in sex work, or struggles with addiction. Society forgets them faster. Law enforcement listens slower, but they weren't forgotten by those who love them. Melissa Barthelemy was just 24. She'd moved to New York from Buffalo, trying to start fresh. She kept in regular contact with her little sister Amanda. But after July 12, 2009, the call stopped. A week later, Amanda's phone rang. It was Melissa's number, but it wasn't Melissa. A man was on the line. Calm, cold. He mocked Amanda, told her Melissa was dead. He called again and again. Over the course of 6 weeks, Amanda received multiple calls, all traced to areas near Manhattan. The voice never slipped. He never gave a name, and the fear only grew. Megan Waterman was a 22-year-old mother from Maine. Her last known sighting was at a Holiday Inn in Hopewell, Long Island, where she had gone to meet a client. She never returned. Amber Lynn Costello, just 27, disappeared from North Babylon, New York. She'd reportedly left her home to meet a client who had contacted her multiple times. Her phone went dead that night, and Maureen Brainerd Barnes, just 25, had left Connecticut in 2007 to go to New York City for work. She was the earliest to disappear. Her case had long gone cold, until she was uncovered at Gilgo. Each of these women had hopes, fears, family, and people who waited for them to come home. None of them expected to end up in the dunes, alone, discarded. As the investigation expanded, more victims were discovered. some with no names, only numbers. Jane Doe number, Altonja Baby Doe. Peaches, Asian male, victims who had no voice and who to this day have no identity. The haunting part wasn't just how they died, it was how easily they were ignored, until someone started stacking them in the sand. Killers leave marks. Even when they think they've covered their tracks, the pattern remains. By early 2011, investigators began to notice something unsettling in its consistency. Every woman in the Gilgo Four had been found within close proximity to each other, no more than 500 feet apart. All were placed just steps off Ocean Parkway, carefully concealed beneath brambles and brush. Not hastily dumped, arranged. They were all wrapped in burlap, an old-fashioned heavy sack material used for landscaping and shipping. It was rough, fibrous, and durable. Not something easily blown away by the wind. But it wasn't just to hide the bodies. It was to preserve control, even after death. Each body was posed similarly, face down or curled tightly. No clothing, no personal items. Phones, jewelry, shoes, gone.
Wrapped in burlap,
and each woman had vanished after arranging a meeting online.
Became known as the
Craigslist,
Gilgo Four,
Backpage, or other escort forums. That was the first behavioral link. But the deeper they looked, the more chilling the pattern became. Many of the victims had vanished during the warm months, late spring to early fall. None in winter. That wasn't coincidence. The killer seemed to wait for the heat when the beach was quiet at night but easy to access, and the sand dry enough to cover footprints. In at least 2 cases, the killer used the victim's own cell phone after the murder. Not to call for help, but to taunt. Melissa Barthelomy's phone, for example, pinged cell towers across Manhattan after her death. Calls were made to her teenage sister, not random, not rushed. The killer stayed on the line long enough to mock, to terrorize, never long enough to trace. Then, silence. It was clear to investigators. This wasn't someone acting on impulse. This was someone methodical, someone comfortable revisiting the dump sites, someone who understood law enforcement blind spots and used them, someone with time. Whoever it was, they were not a drifter. They didn't kill and run. They studied. They selected. They returned. Forensic teams found fragments of hair and fibers in the burlap that didn't belong to the victims. One in particular stood out. Blonde female hair, chemically treated. It showed up on more than one victim. It didn't match any of the women. Some believed it could belong to a girlfriend or a wife, someone who had no idea, or someone who helped. Whatever the explanation, one thing was undeniable. This killer wasn't hiding chaos. He was building a pattern. By 2012, the beaches were quiet again. No more bodies were being found. The headlines faded. The cameras packed up, and the public moved on. But the families didn't. For them, the case was never cold. It was never closed. It simply sat, ignored. Law enforcement created a task force. There were press conferences, pledges to continue the search. But behind the scenes, progress stalled. Leads dried up. Investigators were shuffled. Years passed, and every anniversary brought only more frustration. The mothers of the victims spoke out. Some accused police of not caring because of who the women were, because they were sex workers, because they weren't high profile enough to matter. Even within the police department, questions started to bubble. Was someone on the inside interfering? Was evidence mishandled? In 2016, the former Suffolk County Police Chief, James Burke, was sentenced to prison, not for the murders, but for assaulting a suspect and covering it up. His corruption cast a long shadow. What else had been buried? Meanwhile, technology was evolving. Cell tower triangulation, genetic genealogy, tools that didn't exist when the women first disappeared. And still, no arrests. The killer hadn't struck again, or maybe he had, and they hadn't found the bodies yet. There were whispers in online forums. Amateur sleuths pored over maps, phone logs, timelines. Some pointed fingers, some chased false leads. Some even contacted the families directly, stirring up new pain with every theory. But through it all, the police quietly kept working. In 2020, a new DA took office. He revived the task force, reopened the boxes, dusted off the files, and this time he brought in analysts from the FBI, the state police, and even private labs. A new kind of search began, not on foot but in data. They didn't just look for names, they looked for patterns, vehicle movements, cell tower records, digital footprints left behind in the dark. And somewhere in all that chaos, the pattern finally started to crack. His name hadn't come up before, not once, not in a single interview, not in a single report. He lived just 30 minutes from Gilgo Beach, in a quiet, aging house in Massapequa Park, Long Island. A man with 2 children, a wife, a job in Midtown Manhattan. By all accounts, ordinary. His name was Rex Heuermann. He was an architect, a successful one. He commuted into the city every day by train. He had big clients, big buildings. He wore thick-rimmed glasses, kept to himself, and had a strange, stilted way of speaking. People said he was socially awkward, a bit intense, but never dangerous, until investigators took a second look at vehicle records. In their re-examination of cell site data from the victims' phones, a pattern began to emerge. Certain pings aligned with movements of a specific vehicle, a Chevy Avalanche seen near one of the crime scenes back in 2010. The registration linked to Rex Heuermann. From there, the hunt shifted. Months of surveillance began. Police sifted through his trash. They watched his movements. They studied his habits. And one day they followed him to a pizzeria. He ate alone, and when he left, he threw away a crust. That crust held DNA. When it was tested against a hair recovered from the burlap sack used on one of the victims, it matched familial DNA. Not a full profile, but close enough to say the person who left that hair was related to Rex. Investigators believe it came from his wife, a transfer, innocent or not. But that wasn't all. Rex had burner phones, multiple untraceable numbers. They were used to arrange meetings with escorts. They matched the pattern used by the killer. Some were even active near the sites where the victims disappeared. Others pinged near the calls made to Melissa Barthelomy's sister. Search warrants were executed. Inside his home and office, authorities found dozens of disturbing internet searches, torture methods, victim photos, maps of the dump sites, weapons, box upon box of potential evidence. Neighbors were stunned. He had lived there for decades, raised children, mowed his lawn, built a life. No one suspected a thing. On July 13, 2023, Rex Heuermann was arrested outside his office in Manhattan. Calm, silent, wearing a button-down shirt and a look of confused detachment. When the charges were announced, murder in the first degree for 3 women, the headlines exploded. The monster of Gilgo Beach may have finally been unmasked. He didn't just kill, he researched, he planned, and he remembered. When authorities raided Rex Heuermann's house in Massapequa Park, they didn't just find a cluttered suburban home. They found a shrine of secrets. Over 279 weapons were cataloged: rifles, handguns, pistols, many of them legally owned, some modified. Several were hidden in false walls, concealed compartments, or carefully disguised as everyday storage. It was a house full of compartments, literally and metaphorically. But it wasn't the guns that disturbed investigators most. It was the digital evidence. Recovered hard drives, flash drives, and devices contained thousands of saved search queries going back years. They weren't casual or random. They were precise, dark, obsessive. Phrases like torture methods for small women, how to stop a body from smelling, girl begging for life. Why do serial killers get caught? And most haunting of all, a spreadsheet, an actual file, where victims were tracked, physical descriptions, details. Some matched women who were never found. Others matched known victims, suggesting he'd been reliving the crimes in his mind over and over again. He had photos, screenshots, downloaded files, even graphic illustrations. Some were known crime scene images. Others had never been released publicly. Investigators also discovered maps, some digital, others hand-drawn, showing points across Long Island and nearby coastal areas. Some were marked, some weren't, and some they believed pointed to burial sites that hadn't been discovered yet. Even more alarming was the presence of burner phone data. Cell tower logs tied the burner phones in his possession to both the disposal sites and the victim's final known locations. A few even pinged near his office in Manhattan on the same days that calls were made to taunt one of the victim's family members. It was a pattern of control, before, during, and long after the murders. And yet, Rex Heuermann's demeanor during questioning was flat. Blank, not rage, not fear, just quiet. His wife and children, reportedly, were out of town during several of the murder windows. A coincidence? Or part of the planning? Authorities haven't confirmed whether he acted alone, but they've confirmed one thing. The evidence recovered was voluminous, methodical, and deeply disturbing. It painted the portrait of a man who watched women online, hunted them in person, and stored memories like trophies. But if he was guilty of these 3 murders, the question remained, was that all, or just the ones they could prove? When Rex Heuermann was arraigned, the courtroom was packed, but silent. The families of the Gilgo Four sat in the benches, staring at the man accused of stealing their daughters. Their pain had aged, but it hadn't faded, and now they were face to face with someone they never imagined. An architect, a husband, a father. Rex was formally charged with the murders of Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Lynn Costello. Later, the murder of Maureen Brainerd Barnes was added. He pleaded not guilty. His defense argued that the DNA evidence was circumstantial, that the phone records could be misinterpreted, that there were gaps. And the truth is, they're right. No one had ever caught Rex in the act. There were no eyewitnesses, no direct confessions, only data, patterns, and digital trails. But the case prosecutors built was chillingly tight. Each victim linked by method, each phone call narrowed by tower triangulation, each weapon and search history pointing to a man obsessed with control and with hiding. The trial, still ongoing, is expected to stretch well into 2026. And while the prosecution focuses on 4 victims, authorities have publicly stated they believe Rex Heuermann may be responsible for many more. At least 6 additional sets of remains were found along the same stretch of beach between 2010 and 2011. Some dismembered, some partial, some impossible to identify. One set belonged to a toddler, another to an Asian male, an outlier among the female victims. Those bodies haven't been directly tied to Rex, yet. But the public can't help wondering, if this man lived undetected for over a decade, how many others never made it into the news? And how many families out there are still waiting for a phone call that will never come? Long Island has been forced to look at itself, to question the systems that failed, to confront the reality that the monster lived right next door. There's no resolution yet, no sentencing, no confessions, just a man in a jumpsuit and a town that still listens for footsteps in the sand. The most terrifying thing about evil is how ordinary it looks. In the quiet suburbs of Massapequa Park, the lawn still grows. Children still walk home from school. The neighbors still water their plants. And just a few houses down from it all was a man who may have buried more than a dozen people. Rex Heuermann didn't wear a mask. He didn't hide in shadows. He paid taxes. He picked up his kids. He bought his coffee from the same shop every morning. That's what makes stories like this so hard to let go of. Because it wasn't the middle of nowhere. It wasn't a dark alley in a crime-ridden city. It was right here. It was home. And when the story broke, thousands of people checked their old text messages, their old listings, their emails. People wondered if they had ever crossed his path, on the street, online, at the train station. Because the truth is, you never really know who walks past you in the dark. The women found along Gilgo Beach were vulnerable, but they weren't invisible. They were loved. They were missed. They were real, and someone hunted them with patience, calculation, and silence. Years passed. Their families grieved in public, in private. And when an arrest was finally made, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like a window into just how much we don't see. Until it's too late. The trial will continue. New evidence may come to light. More names may surface. But the waves on Gilgo Beach will keep rolling in, soft, indifferent, and unchanged. And beneath that sand, the echoes remain, of footsteps, of screams, of silence. The Long Island serial killer may have been caught, But the sand still holds secrets. If you want more true crime stories like this, subscribe. We're just getting started.